Joints are any point where two bones meet or interact. They can also be referred to as articulations. The way they interact can change throughout our lifetime, and there are four major types, which are bony, fibrous, cartilaginous, and synovial. The first one is bony joints. This is when two bones have fused together and become one. Two bones become one. This has no movement occurring between the bones, which is also called synostosis. Again, synostosis. An example of this is the mandible and frontal bones, and in adults, fusions of the first rib and sternum, and the epiphysis to the diaphysis and long bones, which we mentioned last week. The next one is fibrous joints. Fibrous joints is when bones bound together by short collagen fibers. They allow very little movement, which is called synarthrosis. Synarthrosis. The three types are suture, gymphosis, and syndesmosis. Suture is the joint between cranial bones. Think of this as stitches. For example, here. This is like a suture. The next one, gymphosis, is the joint between tooth and the mandible or maxilla. So you can see this here, where this is our bone. Obviously, here's our tooth. And this is that adhesive unit here that binds the tooth to the mandibular maxilla. Next one is syndesmosis, which has slightly longer fibers than the standard, allowing for a bit more movement, and the fibers that hold two bones close together. The major examples here are the ulna and radius and the tibia and fibula. So between those bones, there are long fibers between them, just like this, and kind of hold them together. Now the next type of bone is cartilaginous joints. It's two bones that are held together by cartilage. It has a moderate amount of movement, which is called amphiarthrosis. Amphiarthrosis. And there's two types, synchondrosis and symphysis. Synchondrosis is when bones are bound by hyaline cartilage. Example, in children between the diaphysis and epiphysis and between the first rib and sternum. So in that example, we talked about last week that what they call the growth plate, that's that spot between the diaphysis and the epiphysis. The next example is symphysis, which is bones bound by a thick layer of fibrocartilage. An example is in the pubic symphysis and the intervertebral discs. So again, that pubic symphysis, and again, you see it in those discs. All right, buckle up for this one, the synovial joints. These are fluid-filled cavities that connect bones and are freely movable, which is called diarthrosis. Diarthrosis. This is the most common type of joint, or the most widely known. So first we're going to talk about the joint cavity. The joint cavity is the narrow space between the bones filled with synovial fluid that lubricates the joint and reduces friction. This joint cavity is found here. The next thing is the joint capsule, which surrounds the joint cavity, including an outer fibrous capsule and synovial membrane. So that joint capsule is going to be that red outer layer here and here. The fibrous capsule is what holds the joint together and retains the fluid. So here we see the fibrous capsule. Fibrous capsule. And the synovial membrane, which produces the synovial fluid. So again, just kind of that membrane with inside of this cavity here. The last thing is articular cartilage. And articular cartilage is located on the sides of the bone that face each other, which are made of hyaline cartilage to reduce friction. That articular cartilage is this blue line. So again, it is facing each other with those bones in the case that these two collide to reduce that friction. There are some accessory structures within synovial joints, including tendons, which are rope-like structures that attach muscle to bone, ligaments, which are rope-like structures that attach bone to bone, and bursa, which is fluid-filled sacs that cushion and alleviate tendons and bones from rubbing. The additional structures that you may see within these joints are fibrocartilage that extends across the joint cavity and creates sectioned areas of synovial fluid for a greater variety of movement, which is called articular discs. Most of the time you're going to see this in the temporal mandibular joint and the ends of the clavicles and joints between the ulna and carpals. You'll also find the meniscus, which is a fibrocartilage pad that covers parts of the tibia in the knee joint to absorb extra force. There are three planes of movement: multi-axial, biaxial, and monaxial. These are pretty simple to think about. You think of multi, bi, and mon. Mono being one, bi being two, multi being more than two. This just means that the joint can move in 3 axes, in 2 axes, and in 1 axis. And now there's 6 forms of synovial joints. The first one is ball and socket, which is also called humeroscapular, and it's multi-axial. So again, it can move in 3 axes. And the best example is the hip and shoulder. A personal or real-world example, we look at the joysticks on a controller. It's going all the way around. It can go up, down, side to side. Again, looking at those 3 axes. The next one is condylar or metacarpophalangeal, which is biaxial. It's very similar to a ball and socket, but it's more of an oval shape. And it is most commonly found between the metacarpals and phalanges. So if this spoon has food in it and we want to keep that food in there, but move that spoon without spilling as much as we can go in circles, we can tilt a little bit up and down. That's kind of the best real world example for condylar. Next one is saddle or trapeziometacarpal, which is biaxial. It's between the trapezoid and first metacarpal of the thumb. And the most real world example here is obviously, like the name says, saddle, riding a horse. So you've kind of got that side to side movement. You've got that back and forth, front to back. The next one is plane, which is intercarpal, and it's biaxial. And it's between carpals and tarsals. So this one usually is 2 flat, you can think of as 2 flat surfaces sliding back and forth on top of each other. The next one is hinge, which is humero-ulnar, which is monaxial, and it can only move in 1 axis. The best example for this is the elbow and knee, and here we see a door hinge. So a door is only going to open or close. It's not going to sway up or down, just open or close. And then that final one is the pivot, and that is also called radial-ulnar and is monaxial. And the best example of that is the head of the radius with the ulna. So when we twist that wrist over, we see that our entire arm doesn't switch over, it's just rotating that antebrachial part of our arm. And the best example for this is just that I could think of is like a ball on a tether rope, and it goes around, it swivels around this pole here, just over and over and over again, back and forth, going counterclockwise and clockwise. And that would be my best example of a radial-ulnar synovial joint. So going back over, we look at all these different types of joints. We've got 4 different ones being bony, fibrous, cartilaginous, and synovial. This is going to conclude my presentation. I hope that this helped you guys learn a little bit about joints. And if you want a copy of any of this, please let me know. Thanks, guys.